In learning phonics, we teach children about the relationship of sounds to letters. And what they do is they start off by doing invented spellings, which are actually quite productive, in fact. In other words, that you come up with these approximations of the meanings of things based on the way the child is hearing it sounded out. And by the way, even as adults, we do a version of this when we use a spell checker or when we use predictive text. We sometimes put in something which sounds about right, and we hope that the spell checker or the predictive text will come up with the word we were looking for.
There have been, of course, different approaches to reading instruction based on different theories and the debates that abound. Some of these include a phonics approach, and this approach focuses on explicitly teaching the relationship between the letters, the graphemes, and the sounds, the phonemes. The sounds of letters like A, B, C, D, or phonemes, which are combinations like O, oo, and the, and ed. Another approach is decoding, and it focuses on the meaning of whole text. Learners are immersed in the text and they comprehend the meaning by making sense of words from their context. Another approach is called look and say, and it focuses on seeing the whole world and recognizing its meaning. This approach sees writing everywhere and reading everywhere, and learners get to understand what these meanings are and become familiar with decoding and interpreting them. Our own design analysis, it focuses on understanding patterns in meaning at the level of the whole text and in the details of its design and purpose. Of course, depending on your pedagogical choices, there are variations to these approaches and many hybrid practices. In this unit, we're going to go deeper into understanding what these choices are and what impact they can have on learners and the performance of reading.
What's the takeaway from this? Actually, writing is not about getting the phonics right. So no matter how much we do phonics, it's not about getting the phonics right. It's actually about getting the graphemics right. It's actually about spelling the words correctly, and those things don't align. What I've done there is talk about this characteristic didactic approach to literacy pedagogy. What I'm going to do now is talk about a characteristically authentic literacy pedagogy around learning to read. And in fact, it's quite old. And I've got here a page from the old Dick and Jane readers, which have been around forever. So you can see here there are pictures and there are words beside them. It says, "Oh, father, see funny Dick, Dick can play. Oh, mother, oh, father, Jane can play, Sally can play." Okay, so what it's based on is this association of whole words with images and action and the repetition of these whole words. So it's about building these sight recognition of whole words. Now, obviously this is, how many words does a kid have to know to be vaguely literate? Actually a few thousand. And in fact, it turns English into something a little bit like learning Chinese, because you're learning whole words, which are more or less whole meanings, not always, but often they are. So ironically, it's kind of the learning Chinese approach to learning English. Now this became a big and important approach with all the basal readers in the mid-20th century. But the problem with it is there's an awful lot of stuff to learn. There are a lot of words to learn along the way. Now, the kind of theory behind this is that as you read, what you do is you look along the line, and reading can't ever involve sounding out every sound as you go. So this is another critique of phonics approaches. It can never be that, because you'd never get anything read and it wouldn't mean anything. It's actually about seeing whole words, and as your eye goes along the line, it goes along in a jerky kind of way, following the words, and each one of these little jerky stop-starts is called a saccade. And so in other words, what you're doing is you're always reading whole words. Now that kind of aligns with the look-say approach. I want to give these two approaches now technical terms. They both, in a way, can and do involve thinking about phonics. So the first approach is called synthetic phonics, which you start with the sounds and then you make the word. K-at becomes cat. The second approach, it's not as if phonics goes away entirely, because what you can do is you can start from the meaningful word cat. So you see the word, the picture of the cat in the picture book. You see the word cat, you read the whole word as a single word, and then what you might do when you come to spell that word is you might take apart the sound of the whole word in order to spell it out as C-A-T. But in a way, what we're partly going to argue for is what we would call a kind of a both ways reading pedagogy. So in other words, it is useful to have all those phonics concepts to know. Obviously, you've got to know the relationship between sounds and their graphic representation, as complicated as it is. But also, it's important to read for meaning, to go backwards and forwards between those things, to be able to see whole sight words, to do a lot of reading, to get used to the sound of words and so on. So in other words, both these approaches really need to come together, what we call the synthetic phonics approach and the analytic phonics approach. Lastly, what about reading for meaning? So what we do is we might have a sentence like, it was raining on Wednesday afternoon, so John and Betty decided to go to the movies. And if the kids are reading that in the class, how do we know that they've understood what it means? So we've got now beyond, simple, phonemic awareness. We've gone beyond that now, and we're moving to sentences and books and texts in a bigger kind of way. How do we know that? And one of the most characteristic methods that we use is reading comprehension tests. So, there's the reader being asked a question in a test, which was, what day did John and Betty go to the movies? Now, one of the problems with this is this kind of approach to understanding whether the students have understood the meaning of the text. In other words, comprehension as decoding is, being able to read is not just a matter of decoding. It's also a matter of interpretation. So by the end of the story, did you relate to John or Betty? You're a boy or a girl reading it. Which one did you relate to? And what do you think the purpose of the story was? And would you have liked that movie if you saw that movie as well, if you go on further? And that's actually the real meaning of reading. That's the real purpose of reading, those interpretive things. So when we do this kind of comprehension test and we regard reading as simply decoding exactly what the author meant to be saying in a text, we end up with a very narrow view, and the kind of questions we ask are often irrelevant to the purposes of reading and the meaning of reading as you go along the way. So, moving, classically, didactic literacy pedagogy was interested in comprehension as decoding. And of course, it is a decoding exercise, which is trying to get the sense of what the person who wrote the text means. But it's actually a lot more than that as well. So, a kind of a deeper approach to reading and interpreting meaning in reading. A deeper approach is one in which we're also interested in interpretations which are going to be very much varied according to who the person doing the reading is.